Welcome, everyone, to today's roundtable with Ziva Voices, her story in the making. And today's topic is on the importance of why do we need to amplify women's voices? Why do we need to hear more stories of women? Why do we need to also hear all the stories between the heroes and the victims that we usually hear from and talk about? So with today's topic, I want to focus a little bit more on women like us in the world that are just, working daily on creating some impact in the world and are building businesses for themselves, but also helping others to build their own businesses. Welcome today, everyone, to this conversation on why it is important to amplify women's voices around the world. With me today, we have Thea. Would you like to just introduce yourself just very quickly?
Hi, everyone. My name is Thea Myhrvold, proud founder and CEO of Gatsby, and excited to be with all of you today.
And I'm me, Elfverson. I'm coming in from the UK. I'm Swedish. I'm the founder of the Vlog Academy and also the iStorm community.
Hi, my name is Kamila. I'm from Poland, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mind Your Mind.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lucas-Averett, or Ella, and I am the founder of the Trivista Group.
Hi, I'm Asha. I'm from Canada and founder of Elfverson. Happy to be here with you guys.
Thanks so much for taking your time today and be here and just dive a little bit deeper into this topic. So we will just start right away. And the first question that I really have, and I will start actually with me on that one, is I'm really curious to hear, for you, how you are experiencing how women's voices in the UK as well as in Sweden are being muted.
It's quite a serious question, isn't it? It's a strong word to be muted. So I've spent more than 20 years in the UK, so I live here now. I grew up in Sweden, but I'm not quite up to date with Sweden in these matters. And of course, a lot of people think that Sweden and the UK are very equal, that we are all very, good places to be as women as well, that we have a lot of privileges that we don't have in other countries in the world, but there's so much left to be done. And I've talked to other people about this, and we all feel that we are muted every single day, all the time. There's an attitude towards women, especially here in the UK. I wouldn't say it's an attitude that is that people are aware, or men, we should say, that they are aware of it, or the media, or politicians. But there's a history and a habit of questioning women's voices and making women feel both intimidated and muted, which is very sad. So unfortunately, it's still happening in the UK on a daily basis to all of us.
Yeah. Can I maybe also hear from Ella, how is your understanding and perspective of on being muted or not being able to hear enough voices from women, specifically in the US currently, and maybe especially during the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, because the way that I live my life and conduct my business is I feel quite empowered, actually, and I am here to take up space. And I feel that very personally. But when I look at my country right now, one that I'm very proud of, and struggling a great deal to align this current version of ourselves with my understanding of what individual freedom means, I look at what is happening politically and what is happening with women's access to healthcare and what is happening to women's rights. And I don't recognize my country right now. And so, as you said, muting is an extremely powerful word. And I am frankly shocked at the level to which this day and age in 2023, women who have so much influence and impact have been set back 40x years in the land of the free. It's absolutely confounding to me.
Yeah. I think I chose also in particular the word muted because I wanted us to, take a look and just think for a moment about how is this happening and is it even happening, but also just to show the different drastic measures that governments and organizations sometimes still undertake in order to, I feel like, almost intimidate women from speaking up. So it's not always just the active part of muting someone, but also just intimidating so someone doesn't speak up. And I see Thea nodding in that regard. And I would actually like and love to hear Thea's experience a little bit on it, because Thea, you've lived for several years now in Dubai. How is your experience as someone that is in the tech world, a woman in Dubai?
It's a very interesting question, I have to say, and I agree with the previous points. Just on the topic of media and healthcare, we're muting women in many different ways. And just to kind of build on that point, in the tech world and in the funding world as well, the money and the power is also backing up that data, right? With less than 2 or 3% of all VC funding going to women. So we're also muted financially when it comes to opportunity and access. But going to your question on women and in the Middle East, I will have to just shift the perspective a little bit here and say that there has been a phenomenal change and recent adaptation, especially in countries like Saudi Arabia. I'm born in Saudi and I grew up there, and then I lived in many different places, just to kind of give that cultural context where, owning a business as a woman was very challenging before. Now there's drastic change in terms of empowerment, both for women, coming from women, but also young men in society. And that in itself, I must say, is quite refreshing. There are a lot of programs for women. There's a lot of focus in the media, government at all levels of society to promote that access. And that's quite surprising because that's not what we hear in the West. But being and living here, I see a drastic change. So in many regards, also being half Norwegian, I feel more respect and the volume turned up instead of being muted here in the Middle East, which is kind of ironic because that's maybe not the perception that most people have. But I have to say that that's quite inspiring. And if you look at the overall data when it comes to funding, more women get funded here than in the West.
And that's, thank you so much for actually bringing up that point. And we didn't even speak about that earlier on, but I was hoping that you will bring it up because I've been watching you for now several years and, just like seeing from afar, how things have been developing and also seeing all the different events that are taking place in the Middle East. And it is quite refreshing and it's really interesting, how the tables are sometimes turning, and where we need to look at and learn from. So let me go to the next question and see if one of you could just chime in on how have you experienced yourself, to be muted by someone else? Has someone else actively made sure that your voice can't be heard? And maybe we could start first, with Kamila on that point.
I don't have so much experience actually of being muted. And I kind of, this word really represents what is in general happening in my country. But being in business for 25 years almost and being so quite successful, I had to find my voice and just sometimes do not allow people to mute me or do not allow me to contribute. So I see this in general here, and I also see that women sometimes just choose not to take part in some discussions or in some setups or situations, and we maybe later we will be able really to talk about why this is so. But myself, I always found a way to really express what I want to communicate.
But you said, that you had to find your voice, especially in the business setting. And I know that you had a very successful career, and I know that you made it up quite high. So what did it entail for you to be able to find your own voice?
Just maybe some kind of a discomfort and not feeling that I'm not really fully authentic. And that came with my self-development journey. And I shared this story already, that when I got promoted and I went through all this path to be a partner in the global advisory company, and I ended up in a boardroom with only men and expats, so no one from Poland. And I was also the youngest person in the room. And I met with, at the time, my mentor and extremely successful woman here in financial sector in Poland. And she told me from her experience that, okay, so now this is a time for you to change the tone of your voice, to cut your hair, and also dress differently. So, and what I realized, that she wanted me to be a man. So she wanted me to dress up like man. And that was the moment when I really realized that, okay, I probably was not fully myself for all these years when I was going up to the top in the corporate where I worked for. And so now when I've got it, so now I cannot be authentic and I cannot be myself. So that was kind of a journey. And at the end, I decided not to be a part of the corporate world and resign. But yeah, so that was a journey to actually find my voice and meet with what I really want and how I want to express myself.
Thank you. On that note, I think, Afsha, you and I, we had a few conversations, so when it comes to being muted and when it comes also to the advice that someone receives within their own industries. Do you have maybe an example for us, in the finance world? Like, what has been your experience so far in developing yourself as a professional and in being able to also step up and make yourself be heard?
To Kamila's point, I understand completely what you were saying about how it's almost like you have to become a man. I remember very early on being in big meetings, anything that was $1 million plus, I didn't show up in a dress. My hair was in a bun. I never wore it down. I had to be taken seriously, which meant wearing a suit. Now, was I directly told these things? No, but you're given more respect when you have less stereotypically feminine traits. In fact, if I did wear a dress, I would hear comments like, look at her. Comments about my appearance were made before what I was supposed to be giving as advice. The things that I had to say were overlooked. So that's definitely an area that, women in my industry, there's so few of us in the finance industry. And so when you do see someone make it who is at the top, a lot of the times they've taken on the stereotypically male traits in order to be there. And so, I was 23 when I was starting, and I was a bit disheartened by even some of the advice that I got from female mentors. Like, you're going to have men that like you, that are clients, and you should just flirt back. This is how it is. And I remember just being like, this is not the way that we need to build these things. So there's things that women in the industry, we deal with, but I want to speak for women as a whole in the financial industry. It's made by men for men. And so oftentimes women as clients are ignored, right? They're not spoken to about being in the caregiver role with their aging parents or with their kids, what time away they have from the workforce, climbing the corporate ladder. How does that affect their plan? It's often missed. And more recently, as I went independent and left the corporate world, like yourself, Kamila, I've been working with women focused groups only. And it's so surprising. It's not that women are not involved. There's a massive percentage of women who are making financial decisions, that are in charge of the finances, and the decision makers in every aspect. And so you see that come forth when you start to actually address women in the meetings, asking them what their goals are for their family. And, you know, I want to see more of that in the rest of the industry.
Thank you. Thanks. You know, with everything that you've all been now saying, you know, like the one thing that comes to mind to me, and that's also the main reason or why we even started Ziva Voices, is how can we amplify and show more of these stories? How can we showcase, you know, who women really are, and nevertheless, or besides being a woman, they are still successful. You know, I think it's like, I don't want to make it sound negative, but how can we start changing the discourse on what it actually means to be a leader and to be successful, and stop consistently focusing on the gender aspect and having to do it based on a specific gender trait. So when you look around and you look into media, into news, into social media, even around you, or just the magazines, what kind of stories would you love to hear more of? What kind of stories would you like to see? Maybe do you want to jump on that question?
Yeah, so I think there has been a tendency to glamorize women for so many years and objectify women. So as soon as we see a woman, I've done these posts regularly on social media where we celebrate someone who has a celebrity who has a birthday, but from a long time ago, to bring forward women. So there are these sites where you can go through hundreds of people, right, who have done amazing stuff over hundreds of years. And it's absolutely terrifying to see how few women are there. And the majority of the women who are mentioned there are performers. Nothing wrong with being a performer, but it's all about being on stage in front of an audience rather than being scientists or business leaders or politicians, or, you know, and we need to celebrate women for that, and not just the successful women who are there because they have done or have financial success and won awards or are Hollywood stars, but other women in all industries. But we are so fixated on the women's bodies and looks and the glamour of women. And I think we just need to remove that part and look at the real stories, the real people, authentic stories, and look locally for a start and bring them forward. But the press is very, very set on showing women as glamorized objects.
Mm. You know, like when I hear you say this, I'm actually really curious to hear on that matter, maybe from everyone, because we have now, you know, a good variety of countries being present here with us today. So Thea, I don't know, like, because you are in such an interesting, you know, and somehow up and coming, you know, area of the world. What kind of stories would you love to see more, specifically also when it comes to women in tech, because you are a tech founder?
I think, especially going back to what you were just saying, Me, that's where a lot of unconscious bias comes from. It's the narratives, it's the stories that we're told. And especially in technology, just like many other areas of business that are male dominated, like finance and others, there is so much underlying unconscious bias. And if you look at, for example, going back to the data and the numbers, that's where, for example, again, women get funded less because both female and male investors, you know, have this unconscious bias, and we all have some form of it. But it goes back to the narratives and the stories that we're told. So I think, to your point as well, it's about sharing these stories that aren't just about the glitz and the glamour, but it's really having those everyday stories of diverse people who are creating a difference in the world. I remember when I was starting my tech journey, you know, if we can all remember, even just 10 years ago, there were hardly any women in the media that we spoke about when it comes to tech. But if you close your eyes and you think about any man in tech, so many names come to mind, right? Like you have the Mark Zuckerbergs, Elon Musks, all of them, all over the media and every newsstand, every day, everywhere. And that's just the image that we're fed and seen. And that's where, again, a lot of these VCs, pattern recognition, comes from. You think, oh, that's the template, or that's the mold of person who's successful in this industry or this space. That's the person we need to invest in. So I think just, again, amplifying the voices, the stories, the everyday stories of different people in diverse industries like tech or finance or any other male-dominated industry for that matter, but really amplifying the stories of people who are making a difference. I remember one of my close team members, she was preparing for a speech that she had in Egypt for women in tech, and she's originally from Brazil. And I remember I was preparing this talk with her, and it was all about encouraging women in STEM and women in tech. And she said, but I'm not in tech, I'm not coding. I said, yes, but you're a leader in a tech company. So yes, you are a woman in tech. And that was just a paradigm shift for her. And I think that was a very memorable moment for me too, because I think it's really important to have that inclusive storytelling around it. So even the women who are in it feel like they're also part of it and shifting and changing that narrative.
Thea, just on the top of your head, maybe you could just drop 2 or 3 names from other women that are in tech that you have come across in the past couple of years, just so we have some names that we can refer to later on.
I think there's an incredible story of, the woman who started Bumble. Her name's Whitney. She IPO'd very famously with a baby on her arm. So even that visual of, you can be successful with a child, doing that kind of, and her story is incredible, right? Like her history at Tinder and then what she did then with Bumble. So I have a lot of respect for her as well. There's a very young, inspirational founder out of Asia called, I'm sure many of you have used the platform Canva. She's one of the youngest billionaires who's really created an amazing software company. There's the traditional famous Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote Lean In, who's a big, influential person in tech. And we have many others that are coming up. But we need more of these stories. We need more of these names. We need more of those visuals as well of, someone with a baby ringing the bell, going public, or taking their company to that unicorn level. So just normalizing that and visualizing that, I think, is really key.
Mm. Yeah, and you're mentioning it now. I think it was many years of me using Canva till I actually realized and figured out that it was a female founder,
Yes.
which then made me, I'm like, use it even more. Like, this is great. But, Ella, we haven't given you much time yet so far. What are the stories that you would love to hear, because, I know your own story as a business owner is also very creative and very adventurous. So what would you like to see more of specifically also in your field?
I think, first of all, thank you. That's such a good question. And the first thing I'll say is, building on what Me said, I want to see less glamorization and objectification, but I want to see fewer victims. So I feel like victim stories of women are front and center right next to women's bodies and women aging and women being glamorized and all of the things that Me said so eloquently. I feel like that is in heavy competition with women as victims, and in so many ways. And I won't go down that rabbit hole with us right now, but even just suffice it to say, like, true crime is one of the largest, most successful genres in all of podcasts. Like, there's such a hunger and a thirst for that. And some extraordinary percentage of that are women as victim stories. So when you combine those two things, the element that Me mentioned, and then bringing that to the table, set that to the side. What I want to see more of, I want to displace the appetite for those stories with stories that challenge our definition of success. So building on what Thea said, I think that right now we have a great deal of room for extreme financial success, very obviously, unicorns, businesses that have blown up. I would love to challenge our definition of success, because I want to hear stories that fall more to, like, the more recent coverage about the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example, someone who is doing it all, but not all at the same time. I have an enormous appetite for women who are doing it all, but not all at the same time, because to me, that's reality. And that is the definition of success, is that I get to be 360 degrees of a person, a woman who's powerful in business, a woman who is successful by the book, right? By the definition, who wants to have a robust family life, who wants to be physically capable and grow stronger every day, who wants to have some fun and adventure, and who wants to work on spiritual, mental, etc. So I want to see 360 degrees of women, and I want to hear their stories. And frankly, Kinga, that's why I know you and why I'm so supportive of the Ziva Voices mission, is because that's why we exist. But yeah, I want to move the needle in that regard. So
yeah, no, I mean, and I hear you. And there were also so many other topics that you were just bringing up that we will, throughout the year also discuss, like what does it mean to have it all, for example. And I think another topic, and even with the group right now here, what I think it's, I think the topic of age, it's the other day I was talking to one of our neighbors that is 92, and I asked her, I'm like, when you're waking up in the morning, and you're picturing yourself, like, what age are you in? It's like, besides the years that we are counting. And I think that that's something that really matters, because no matter what the number is that someone counted for you or created for you, I think that we are living now in a time where we can just define ourselves in different ways. So yeah, does anyone else, Kamila, Aksha, do you want to chime in on that matter and share, what is it that you would like to see? What kind of stories would you like to hear more of?
Yeah, go ahead, Kamila.
I think that what we really need to hear, and it's not really enough of it, is really like unbiased perspective or optics of regular women. And we can go back to your question about being muted and just ask them whether they can feel that they are not really fully able to contribute or express, and why, and actually find this out. And also now, also thanks to the technologies, we now know what's going on in us, and we understand the nervous system, and we have so much knowledge now about biology, psychology. And we also see the real differences that there are between men and women. And we can see that we are not worse, we are just different. And also what you are doing and promoting, the aspect of emotions. I think this is a huge topic that for years, when it was, male-dominated structures or systems, there was no room for emotions, and the emotions are part of human beings, not just women. And women are perceived as being more emotional, but is it a bad thing? And we also, what we also see, and I don't think that there is enough, information about it or dialogue about it, is that we can see now that the traits that are attributed to women, like being more collaborative or cooperative or empathic or being of service, we can see that. And we can see now that men are looking for these traits that are, more perceived to be women. So I think there is a huge gap and a room for females in all aspects of our lives, but we need to find a way to communicate it, how we want to contribute, whether we want to contribute, and not in a way that we want to take away something from men, but actually that we want to add to it.
I think that you just, hit on something that's really important, and it's for us to figure out to how we want to actually contribute, right? So to really start communicating and verbalizing it. This is what we want to do. This is our strength, and this is what we want to share with the world. And so when you're also saying, that we are more collaborative and that we are integrating people way more, something that quite often has been in the past also just like move to the side, because as a leader, you're supposed to move forward. And then we had for a very long time, top-down processes being seen as the best practice. I always have to laugh when people say, anyway, like, we're following a best practice. I'm like, what does that mean? Anyway, but so I love what you're saying. And yes, certainly, of course, when it comes to emotions, I started at some point in my research, I started just like pointing out to people, I'm like, if emotions are part of us at any given moment and all the time, the only time when you're not experiencing emotions is actually when you are not alive anymore. So that's like, otherwise they are there. I mean, these chemical reactions are happening continuously and constantly. So it's really interesting, how people say, hey, but I'm not emotional in my opinion and my decision making. I'm like, that's not possible. But Afsha, you wanted to also say something on that topic. Like, I don't know if you want to, but also maybe give us a little bit also of your experience of growing up and what kind of stories, could have made it a lot easier for you to grow up and be who you are right now, but maybe already 3 years earlier.
I think, so number one, I definitely want to see more women over the age of 50. I was reading an article this morning that said the best years of human life are between the ages of 60 and 80. And we don't see that represented in women. I want to know what life is like. What can I prepare for? How does it get better? And then, of course, for myself growing up personally, I mean, it would be a complete injustice to not talk about the intersectionality of women. So I would have loved to see more women of color. I can't imagine how impactful it would have been if I just saw a woman of color as a CEO on the boards and advertisements, right? Stock images. If you Google business, professional, finance, you're not going to see Black women's hair. You're not going to see an Indian woman wearing jewelry. There's so many pictures that we could change when you just start to think about what's the norm. But there are many of us, and that's when I realized as I started to grow up, is like, wait, there's actually so many women that have. I mean, their studies show it's been proven that it's, the better economic decision to have more women on boards. I think what I would like to see is a lot more women of color and bring in sort of the different things like their culture and their backgrounds represented in those fields and not shunned out as unprofessional.
Yeah. I think that those visual pictures, that you're really pointing out are important to accompany the stories that we are telling, right? Because I think that a lot of people don't understand, or for many people, it's also difficult to imagine, the story or picture the story that we are telling them without the visual representation of it. Tell me, Afsha, with you having, been born in Canada and lived in Canada all your life, but you have a different cultural background, right? Mm-hmm. How were you able to integrate both worlds? And that's something, I'm curious because, as you know a little bit, I, grew up between two cultures, but a lot of people thought that those two cultures are very similar, even though they were very different. But, I think it's like, how easy was it for you to have other people understand the differences?
So one thing to begin with, you talked about, right, I'm Canadian, right? So when people ask me where I'm from Canada. But oftentimes I'm told I'm from Pakistan. I've never been there. So actually, but it had a profound impact on how I grew up, right? My mom was in Pakistan in the 50s. So we were raised with 50s values and culture and everything infused. So I spoke 3 languages growing up. And so my sister and I have an entire podcast episode on what it's like to grow up bicultural. And, you know, I mean, I remember the first time that I learned that I wasn't white. I grew up in a very Caucasian city. I was told before I knew that I was different. And so growing up, I actually realized it really became one of my strengths. Like, you very quickly realize when you know that home is different and the outside world is different, you're able to understand that people live in different ways. We become pretty astute and very aware at an early age that there are differences, that this, you know, what we consider normal can change. There's flexibility. It actually makes us incredibly aware. And so I think growing up, it was really tough. It's a really tough topic to say, you know, how did it affect me? I mean, every single day I had to, I was aware of what I ate, how I dressed, how my clothes were different, what I could wear to cultural events and what I could wear to school were completely different. I mean, we have two wardrobes, right? We have like the Indian traditional clothing, and then you have Western clothing. So everything that you do, there's two of them. And so it was tough growing up, because what do you want to do? You want to fit in. In junior high and high school, you want friends and you don't want to stand out. And so, but it, you know, to anyone listening to this, if you're growing up and you're still feeling some of these things, my God, it becomes a strength. You're able to travel the world so much easier. Languages don't intimidate you. You understand that there's different ways of living. And I think that I would love to shed more light on that and people talking about their experiences. For myself, there's two things that I deal with: being a brown woman and being brown and a woman. And I don't think that I actually came to terms with that or realized that until later on, well past my 20s.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I saw Thea nodding, you know, and I mean, she knows also that I'm in high agreement of that growing up between cultures, you know, gives you the flexibility later on to be, I think, more patient also. It's not just about being tolerant, but being more patient and actually allowing someone else to express themselves before we jump to conclusions or assumptions. So I think that was really, you know, important that you shared that. With that, I'm really curious to hear, and I think that Thea, because Thea had a really interesting upbringing also with, you know, growing up and traveling between cultures and doing different things. Thea, in your opinion, why do you think that many of the current policies that have been implemented in a variety of different countries and cultures also have not created much or enough change actually for women to be really equal in society?
It's a tough question. But I do think if you look at most of the decision makers, unfortunately, look who's around the table. And I think that's the biggest problem, is diversity and inclusion when it comes to those kind of level of decisions. It's very little representation from women in general, very little representation from minorities as well, and can definitely relate to a lot of the points mentioned earlier. But I think from an inclusive perspective, we've seen that with leaders like Jacinda Ardern that was referenced earlier. When you have women in leadership, or when you have more diversity in leadership, you have different perspectives, you have different insights, you have different understanding. And therefore, then you can create more inclusive policies or more, you know, diverse approaches to things. And I think when we talk about inclusivity and diversity, you know, it's not just this checkbox of, okay, I've hired a woman, so I'm good. But for example, in my company, as one example, I was very conscious of not just hiring copies of me, not just similar women to me. Diversity truly means different people from different cultures, backgrounds, perspectives. We actively needed to hire men. It was also very important to me to have that balance, because otherwise it becomes an echo chamber. And if you look at, you know, the majority of government and policies that are in place today, it's, and even business, the way that most businesses are run and boardrooms are set up and workplaces are set up, it's echo chambers of men, right? Usually a certain type of person in power. So I think for that to really change, we need to listen to different voices. We need to have more inclusivity, and we need to change the narrative.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. I mean, I have to say, you know, like I know all of you, right? So when I was also putting down some of the questions just as markers for myself, I still didn't know exactly into which direction the conversation is going to go, if I'm being honest, because some of these questions are tough. And I think that it is really difficult sometimes to really pinpoint out what the problematics are behind the inability of changing systems. But going back to what Ziva Voices is trying to do, and also going back to what most of us are working within our own companies and projects, how can we change systems? And do you believe that we can actually change systems? And what do we need to do in order to change systems? Ella, do you want to maybe start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't believe that that was possible, then I don't know what I would be quite doing with myself, to be honest with you. And I'll answer a little bit simply, to be frank. In my opinion, absolutely yes, we can change systems, we can change how we live, we can change what we think normal is by highlighting different perspectives, as every woman here has said to some extent. And we need to see examples of what is possible. To summarize what we've been saying, I would offer we need to see what good looks like in all of its forms. So to me, that means we need to see women balancing many priorities. We need to admit that when you do one thing, another thing gets neglected, and that is reality. We need to own that and not feel shame about it. And in my opinion, as I mentioned, we need to change the definitions of success, balance, achievement to encompass women's experiences, all women's experiences from all over the socioeconomic spectrum, cultures, geographies, etc. So I'm a resounding yes, in a word.
Thanks. With just maybe touching on what Ella has been saying. You have your own company and you've been growing it in a foreign country as a mother. I mean, so you are also a mother. We haven't touched on that point at all today so far, which is really, quite interesting. But I think before we actually end the entire conversation, and we have just a few minutes left, can you tell us maybe a little bit, like, what do you think, what has to change in order to make it easier for women just like you that have a child or have children, to be able to grow their businesses and grow their impact in their societies more effectively?
Yes, so I was a single mom, an immigrant, you could say, in the UK, from Sweden, but still. And I didn't have any relatives here to look after my child at all. So I overdid my welcome with all my friends and had to manage and set up my company. And it's tough, it's hard. And not only as a, small business owner, but in the corporate world, in politics, in all areas. We need to change the systems to the women's world. We need to adapt. We can't change the women. We need to change the way that we accommodate women. And one of the most important things here in the UK compared to Sweden is childcare. So there is very little childcare support here. It's extremely expensive, which means that a lot of women stay at home longer because it's cheaper to stay at home and look after your children yourself and get some social security funding or something else. Whereas in Sweden, they have a lot of funding towards childcare. You can put your child into a nursery from 1 year old and you go back to work. And of course, not all women want to do that. Some women want to stay with their children. That's absolutely fine. But if you do need to go back to work, if you need to make money, if you are married and you want to share the responsibility for, covering the costs, it's very difficult for women to get back to work here, which means that we have a gap here of many, many years where women are not, first of all, working. They're losing their own experience and their knowledge and expertise. They fall out of the system, and also the society. It costs society a lot because they're not contributing to to the general income of the nation, the national income. So that's one big part, which I think is really important. And just to make it possible for people to have children and work at the same time, not work 60 hours a week or 80 or 100, whatever it is in the financial industries. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I hear you. Yeah. And there's a, great book, The Double X Economy, that also speaks about that, and, touches specifically also on countries such as UK. But yeah, well, with that, thanks so much, everyone, for joining in today and sharing, bits and pieces of your own world and your experience. And I hope that we can, continue with these conversations throughout the year and just bring in new women from all over the world together on this platform. Because the idea, behind Ziva Voices is to really, create more equality between all the women around the world and highlight the enormous differences and variety in culture and how we do things, And I think one of the biggest lessons that I made at some point in my life was when I moved to South Africa for the first time. And there's such thing as, South African time, which is very different to German time. In Germany, being on time means that you're actually 5 minutes early. So arriving in South Africa, I think, took really a little bit of adaptation on my side, and I saw a lot of other people really struggle with it, and a lot of people leaving the country because they were not able to manage that. But what I always thought that was just so incredible, at the end of the day, things got done anyways, right? So that was really one way of, for me at least, understanding, that it doesn't have to be one way, and best practice or a specific doing something in a specific way isn't always the way that everyone has to do it, and we need to be more flexible. So with saying that, again, thanks so much, and I hope that we can just join in at this table, at this virtual table again, and I wish you all a very great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kinga.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah,
I wrote
thanks,
notes from everything you guys said. It's wonderful.
Wonderful.